Could you now begin to ponder an expanded possibility, since many of you cannot probably, or do not want to, try and enlarge your apartment or condo, especially those of you still under the auspices of rent control. But let's expand something. Could any of you consider the possibility now that energy itself might be living its own separate identity? Energy. I ask you, can you ponder it? You're not supposed to be able to. This is in three-dimensional conflict with the operations of the nervous system under all known three-dimensional laws within physics and chemistry and the movements of electrons. But there is right before you constantly in your own brain, and then what appears to be inside the movable state out there, of all known collective wisdom, institutional wisdom, individual insights having to do with human nature. For instance, and do try and expand this, since it doesn't cost the same as it might if you were trying to raise or lower your ceilings at home. Humanity continues historically to try and discuss types of people. It's been going on for 5 or 6 years, thousands of years. It seems to strike a very responsive chord in thinking peoples everywhere, even within the context at times of religious umbrellas, that still there should be types of men and women, and that their behavior, once it's even suggested, would seem to fall into some sort of finite categories, descriptions. And yet, as they have tried to do it right up until today in psychology, the intellect gets very soon stymied over inexplicable anomalies. And this especially has to do specifically with what I would assume that they would still nowadays refer to as the psychological roles that people play. And when I say the intellect gets stymied, even though it is at first unconditionally attracted to the notion that there are types of people and therefore describable finite limits to human behavior that would be reflected in various types of people. And this goes all the way, even though I wasn't going to expand historically, you should realize yourself, all the way from at least 6,000 years worth in the subcontinent of the caste system, all the way into Western psychology, biology, into the 20th century of people attempting to find a standard division of people, even physiologically, the way in which they are made up, their bony structure, their fatty structure, their muscular structure, the way their heads are shaped, the distance between their eyes, the kinds of occupations that they seem to be attracted to. Just on the surface, it all seems to fit, to point out that football players all look to be a certain way. You do not see someone playing football that has the physiological makeup of a Carl Sagan. And don't just say, well, that's obvious, he'd never make the team. It's more than obvious. It's more than obvious. You can say, well, he's not tall enough, he's not big enough. You're missing it. And it's also when you find the people, all right, that do seem to be big enough, strong enough, they are not generally going to be threatening to take away your seat in med school, law school, any graduate school. They perhaps will not stand between you and the last seat in graduation from the 12th grade, should you go back and try and further your higher education. But all of this, if it's just hinted to up-to-date intellectual people, they go, yeah, I mean, there's no doubt there's something there. And yet, when it comes down to what we're about to get to, it would seem to be the specific roles, the psychological roles that people play, there are inconsistencies of such an immediate nature that it never reaches any satisfying episodic conclusion. And we have been talking about things and processes that bear upon this. It can be noted, for instance, I say for instance advisedly because I'm going ahead and picking out an example that actually touches all areas, or is a supreme example of the idea of psychological roles, thus what should be predictable behavior, appropriate behavior to types, and the anomalies. It can be noted that an individual is very aggressive, and that might be their term. Now let us call it dominating. Let us just call it a man. A man is very dominating to his family. Wife, children. He is the Old Testament head of the family. It's also noted, though, that on his job, he is, at the very least, begrudgingly submissive to his boss, which also, if whoever was writing this treatise or whoever was making this observation in the world of psychology cared to pursue it would have to say his boss in some way is at least as dominating as he is in his own way. But at any rate, here is a man who is dominating. They start off observing him and his family. That's where he spends a large part of his time, and that would still seem to be the most important aspect in most people's lives, the furtherance of the race and the need for the family. And they'd say, this man is dominating, perhaps to the point that it may even be disturbing to the rest of them or unhealthy. But at any rate, there is no doubt you look at him and he is dominating. He comes in the house and everybody, from the wife on down to kids and the dog and the cat, everybody runs for cover when he comes in. He does not take any lip off of anybody. They all dance backwards. And yet, he gets in his car, he leaves, he runs over bicycles, he screams at his wife, have dinner, and he gets to work 20 minutes later and he walks in, now at least begrudgingly, because I may take us on a little side trip if you begin to hear this, but at least he gets in there, and we're not going to compare it because that is only valid, which is useless, but it's only valid in three-dimensional descriptions as trying to compare whether he or this boss I'm going to have to make up is more dominating. That's not the point. But it would seem to be that he is submissive without any question to the boss once he gets there. He walks in and he's been dominating all the way down the highway. He's shaking his fist at people and get out of my damn way. And he's cursing the radio. He parks his car and he even gives a little bad rap to some of the people there that he works with. He's hollering out at people there, even his own acquaintances. But he gets in, and perhaps the boss is walking out to the water cooler, and the boss may turn around and say something like, "Ha! You just barely made it, didn't you?" And maybe he goes something like, yeah. But if you looked at those two roles right then, you'd say, all right, he is submissive to the boss. In the city, ordinary intelligence, when it thinks along these lines, whether it was using these particular words or not, it has a kind of wired-in belief that it should be one man, one role. They attempt to go a little further psychologically, and they do it along the lines of people's roles are so somehow ingrained into their particular psychological type that in fact it does stand out when it seems to be acting in a way inconsistent with the, at least, predominant role that the person is playing psychologically. Therefore, it is a little unusual, they might say, for this man to end up in a job where he has to even begrudgingly act submissive to someone else. They could almost make that continue to fly. But let me draw out some more of what would not be an unusual three-dimensional scenario. Besides this very dominant, unquestionably dominant psychological role being played by this man vis-a-vis his family. And when I said his family, his neighbors, his poker playing buddies, his whole, outside of his job, what would seem to be his whole social world, he plays the dominant role. But at work, at least with his boss, he appears to be, at least begrudgingly, playing a submissive role. Now, someone could say, well, he's got no choice. If he wised off to the boss would say, hey, I've had it with you out. I never did like your attitude. When I said begrudgingly, I'll go ahead and throw it in now, I'm just describing city affairs. A few people getting this on tape, it is of no particular interest. It is really childish descriptions. It is not really pointing yet to the energy behind it all. But in the city they could say, well, he has to act submissive because if you're going to keep a job, you've got to put up with a certain amount of crap. And that's part of what he's putting up with. But how about this? Let's say that the boss is primed and wired in such a way, his aggressive, his dominant role, is such that he, quote, knows somehow that this particular employee is not all that submissive. In other words, if I took the boss aside, and we're talking about the first guy that I made up, and I said, nice office here, most of the people seem to be decent employees. And he went, yeah. And I said, that one guy, he seems to do his job, but every time you speak to him, he'll smile and he'll go along with what you say, but there seems to be a certain kind of edge. I suggest to you that if somebody did that, and there'd be no reason to, but this boss I made up could go, yeah, I know that. And he even sometimes goes out of his way to make the guy act submissive, knowing that it will be begrudgingly, and that it's not a full act, that when he dances with this employee, my first guy, the guy will dance backwards, but he does it with both legs about as stiff as an ironing board, and periodically will even accidentally step on the boss's foot and maybe go, well, excuse me. So that they both almost, now I'm using the ordinary psychological terms that would be acceptable in the city were they to look at it this way, that you can say, well, they both have got some kind of unspoken arrangement that they're both pretty aggressive. And it'd be sort of like two rams trying to live in the same territory, and for whatever reason they decide to try and coexist for a little while, but both of them are so dominant that if push came to shove, push would come to shove. And therefore, because of the way things are, they simply do not do it. But that's not good enough. That is still a excruciating anomaly that the ordinary intellect doesn't want to consider, is how does this happen? Why is it this way? Why is he not working for somebody that either could dominate him to such a degree that his submissive role at work would not be begrudgingly, or ersatz, quasi-apparent, it would just simply be. Or else why doesn't he find a position? Why hasn't life been arranged such a way he finds a position where he can be dominant? Why doesn't he have his own business? The begrudging part, or the part I was pulling out of ordinary city psychological terminology, that the boss might, quote, know that this guy's not all that submissive. Like everybody else in the office, the boss can walk in and holler, all right, I want everybody to stand on your head and stick your tongue out. And that everybody else in the office, everybody that he has hired, he pays their salary. If it wasn't for his job, as far as he's concerned, most of them would be out of work and out of luck. And he says it, and they all jump up and do it, including this one guy. He's the last one to get up, and he kind of does it like this, and he takes his time. But the boss can even say, all right, does anybody have any problem with this? And they all go, no, no, no. And that guy may just stand there with one on his head and his tongue out, and the boss might look at him like, I didn't hear you say anything, and he might go, and it's like the boss will let it go, that he got something out of him. But do you see that starting off on the premise, which is not unreasonable, that the intellect has already been wired up by life to believe that there are observable, definable, if we could just get our hands on it more, if the jello would stand still, or if we had more statistics probably, that there are roles, and you almost have them, and then they get all kind of, they get a little vague. The statistical proof is probably not yet ready for delivery. We're probably still in the 7th month. But beyond all of that, beyond him being begrudgingly submissive to his boss, how about this? They've hired someone new, a female, very attractive female, payroll clerk who works there in the office. And he has occasion to have to deal with her. She has occasion to have to deal with him and even say things to him about the way he filled out, but this and that. And he appears to be almost pleasurably submissive to her. And she can't fire him. He has no reason to think that she's sleeping with the boss. Need I say more? 40-year-old guy, classical case, she gets hired, and I mean, she is a doll. And he treats her almost to the point of real submission. I mean, she can just look up from her corner over there like she's looking for something, and he'll just jump up and run over like, "Are you looking? Is this something you need some coffee? You need something?" That sort of thing. Everybody understands that. This is the point, although I have no idea that psychology has ever carried it this far because they got no reason to. That's not the point. But I do know for a fact, and you should know, we're not talking about the institution of psychology. It is a reflection of what people have been thinking about for thousands of years, that they look around, that there are types of people, and they can almost put their hands on it. Everybody knows this. You see somebody that looks like your sister's first husband, that old dumb so-and-so that she finally dumped, that old bricklayer, that old overweight, red-headed, no offense to redhead. At any rate, you can be in a foreign country and see somebody walking down the street and look, and it's suddenly that guy. And there's no doubt, if I jumped out and into your nervous system and said, "Who is that?" and you'd say, "I'll be damned if that's not Buford, my sister's first husband." And I say, "I bet it's not." And you might go, "You're right. I mean, there's not a chance in the world that he's here in Vienna," especially walking toward the opera house. But if I said, "I know who he is," and what you're seeing, that angle and the way that guy's walking, I know exactly because I know Buford. You don't know me, but trust me, I know Buford. And the guy go, "Yeah." And I said, "Would you believe this, that guy has probably the same," or if I said, "I guarantee you, he has almost the same political beliefs," blah, 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 blah. Many people go, "Yeah." And now I think about it, I guess all you know this as well as I do, what just in the common news they have for the last couple of decades been working on and getting statistical proof that's beginning to disturb them, so I assume they'll drop it soon unless life changes. Well, unless life changes the agenda, and that is going back and finding twins have been separated. And they get into areas that if I'm used as an example, you'd think I was pushing it. Those of you who hadn't read it, they find twins that were separated at birth. And they go out and they find them, and they're both now 50 years old. They just got so much proof that you're just hearing it's decreasing to even make the news. They both married women named Brunhilde. They both smoked Salems. They both drank Pabst Blue Ribbon. They both worked in service stations. Both of them broke their leg in high school playing football. The same. Anyway, this just goes on, and it's like, no. Because, of course, as far as they take it, is the people that do pursue this for a while, they say, well, we got to admit there's some statistical evidence that may show that genetics may play a bigger part on our makeup than some of us thought in the past. And the people doing the work kind of look at each other. Of course, it's life looking at itself and going, "No, I don't think so." And the people go, "No, I don't really. We could be wrong." And if we push this much further, I bet some of you will accuse us of being neo-Nazis. And the whole world that's interested in that sort of goes, "Yeah, you better watch it." And it's like part of life's nervous system. "Yeah, we better watch it." We just don't have enough proof yet. And of course, in a sense, what they're saying is, we almost have too much proof. At any rate, you are back to the point, I was just showing you some more ways, you're back to the point that what would seem to be and strike people once they hear it under any guise that there have got to be, there's no doubt there are psychological types and their behavior would be therein reflected. And people go, "Yeah." And they investigate just a little bit though, and something happens. And that's what I was putting words in their mouth perhaps. They find it to be absolutely disconcerting in a truly academic and intellectual sense, fraught with anomalies to the point that it's just as though they lose interest, or as though they sit and think and go, well, I thought I was onto something, but the statistics are too erratic. I just don't see a need to press on with this. And it's on the basis that there does not seem to be, back to my example, that this man that I made up, he does not seem to be, once you look at him in a more manifold, complex manner, he does not seem to be either strictly dominant or submissive. And all of you should see by now, in the three-dimensional world, amongst other descriptions, everybody at any given time is either entertaining or they're being the audience. Everybody is dancing forward or backward. Everybody in any relationship, even to themselves, for those of you getting good, but any two people, any 2,000 people, any one guy and then 2,000 people, or any 2,000 people and then the one guy, somebody is dancing forward. Somebody is dominating it if it is an alive occurrence, if it's not just a passing something. If it's not just, you got the time, 3 o'clock, thanks. If it's not that, if it's any more than that, somebody is dominating, using ordinary terms, and somebody is being submissive. There is no choice. It is the flow of energy. And that's just one description of it. It's not a qualitative judgment of any kind. Being dominant is not better. Of course, three-dimensional people could question that. But being dominant at any given time is not better than being submissive or vice versa. But that is the fair description from this view tonight. So the anomalies are, well, this guy looked to be such a prime candidate that the man is a walking poster child for domination. His family, his neighbors, he can play the stereo late at night, he can throw garbage over the fence, and his neighbors have had enough run-in with him that they had rather put up with whatever it is than even deal with him. He's that kind of guy. I'm just trying to push the example. And yet he walks right in that office under a different circumstance, and he's not that way. And psychologists could say, well, that's true. People do play different roles. They've got to in life. And I can say, all right, come on. Well, the circumstances are different, and somebody's got to play a different role. So what does that do with the role playing? Well, I don't know. I guess people have different roles. We're not sure. We just do not have enough statistics yet. You know, we've only been compiling them now 50 or 60 years, and give us a break. My suggestion for you to consider is beyond the questions that we've already raised and examples we've used. If you remember first, the possibility, the distinct possibility that words from a certain quite real view might have a life, a separate living existence of their own. Then after several weeks, killing time, we consider the possibility that emotions might have their own separate living existence apart from the people who apparently had them. The same as the possibility of words having a potential life of their own apart from whoever might say them. If you can push this further and consider energy as being the overall umbrella, the overall possibility, then every question that the intellect has ever had, all the questions regarding the ambiguous, the incongruous, the inconsistent, the ironic, the unpredictable behavior of man is laid open like a cheap coconut. Just there it is. Not to stop and have to worry about, well, words, that's weird. Or emotions, I don't know. There are all kinds of, it's whether it be a real necessary emotion or maybe not a necessary emotion, or, I don't know, words, I heard what you said once, I thought about that. And I guess sometimes it might be in some strange way. Consider just the energy itself, that words and emotions are some form of energy. You don't have to be in any way inclined to be, God forbid, metaphysical or weird or mystical, or even an accountant or an attorney. to see that what takes place in life is some form of energy. And I don't mean it in quotation marks, and I don't mean it in kind of New Age sense. It's not some kind of cosmic vibrations. It's damn energy. You've got to be able to see that to enjoy this at all. For somebody to say, hey, would you shut the hell up while I'm talking? And that's a form of energy. You can call it other things. You can say, well, it's a form of aggression. You can say, well, it's a man being upset. You can say, well, it's a man who feels as though he's been offended. You can call it anything you want to. But to turn around to a stranger, to your own kid, to a dog, to your wife. I said I'd be home at 7. I want supper cooked. Or you come in and the woman says, I've told you if you're not going to get straight home, fix your own damn supper. A priest says, you mark my words, you people keep doing that and blah, 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 blah. All of that you have got to see as a form of energy, or saying, oh, what a person. Come here and let me give you a hug. Or to turn around to somebody and say, you are the best kid in the world. I could not be more proud of a child. You are just, it's all a transfer of energy, no matter what else it may be called on the playground, in kindergarten. It is energy. Now the possibility of words and emotions that we covered, can you see that if you could expand it and drop the idea of words and emotions and just energy, which is what they are, so we're just simply upping the stakes, to see it as kind of being a wrap-up of this. And all the old ideas covering both words and emotions of people saying, there are things I think about, there are things I see, and I can't see, I don't know, words just won't cover it. Everybody said that. They claim that Buddha said it. Jesus, Winston Churchill, Franco Tupperware. I mean, important people have said this. Poets, politicians, you. The words, I think things that are just so astounding. I even try to write at times, and I don't know, there's just no words to cover it. Everybody's accustomed to that. And the other one is, I have feelings. There are things that I feel, there are passions, emotions I have that words will not express. And all of the variations in there. The wrap-up, if you can see, is within the possibility. It's not that words fail in some way. It's that if the possibility I am presenting has any validity, it's that the intellect cannot in any way translate energy into words. Not fully. And the way the intellect thinks, not properly. How are you going to fully transfer energy into words? You sure as hell come close, or people would not talk. They would not talk about their ideas. They would not talk about their feelings. And life would not be using this as a conveyance of energy. But everyone feels this. You don't have to be a philosopher or a would-be poet. You'd be standing around talking to somebody, your mother, your father, your lover, a child, just a friend, somebody you know, and you try to say something to them directly, or you try to say something to them about a third person. And you go, well, I tried to tell you how I feel, and really I did a poor job. And other people go, yeah, I know. And if it's not emotional, people that would assume that might be interested in this, that have some interest in the intellectual world, read, think, try and observe life, try and have your own philosophical insights, try and talk to yourself, and there are things you think that you almost see, something of an interesting, profitable nature, and you can't really say what it is. Maybe you even try to tell a friend, like, sometimes I look at the so-called battle between the sexes, and I sometimes believe that blah, 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 blah. And the person goes, yeah. And you go, well, That's still not exactly what I meant. And they go, well, you go, well, I don't know. I can see it. I mean, I can see it pretty good, but you all know that. But it's normally laid at the feet, the shortcoming feet, of words themselves. No one ever says this. No one has ever said this, and I assume how I say it, that some of you, it'll be so obvious that you'll want to go, well, why did you even bother to say that? But I'll tell you beforehand, I'm going to bother to say it because nobody on the planet's ever said it on purpose. They always say it is a shortcoming. It's the limitation of words, and that can't be true. It's the limitation of intellect, which is another way of saying it's the limitation of how you are, you and everyone else, transferring energy, translating energy. There is no way the intellect can take energy and fully translate it into words of any kind, any language, under any auspices, under any guise. The energy will not translate totally into words, because although you can call words a form of energy, you can call words a form of matter, it is not, because of the nature of the intellect, it is not a creative source itself. It cannot fully transform one thing to another. You have always got a loss. You've always got a loss through friction. There is a loss if you had a full feeling. If you had a full energy feeling, let us say that you were such a person that you had a quick burst at least of 100% undiluted hate. That suddenly, there it is, late January, you got 2 cases of beer, and right there at the last few minutes of the Super Bowl, they do it again, they suddenly, inadvertently interrupt, and they're showing the last few minutes of The Sound of Music. It is absolute, pure, pristine hate. All right. There is no way, if it was the purest kind of hate ever felt by a mortal man, all right, or you pull it out and your last Trojan has its head cut off. Anyway, it's pure hate. There is no way that you can translate that pure hate into a full verbal representation. You can holler, Jesus, holy, or anything else. But it will not. If I say, well, do you feel better now? Well, you can say, well, yeah, I feel better. But if I said, is that really what you meant? No, it isn't. If you said the worst thing you could say, and of course I didn't say the worst thing that probably some of us could say. It is simply not possible to translate energy totally into words. It is not possible. That is not the way the three-dimensional world works, even within the inner state of man. If you begin to consider this possibility, then I could ask you this question: what more would need to be said about your old world attitude, questions, and complaints that you have about you? Well, about anything, but I thought that would seems to be most people's interest. It should be. You cannot even fully translate what seems to be the complaints, the questions that you have about you. Well, I should do better. Well, why don't you? Well, can you even tell me exactly what it should be that make you do better? Well, all right, I should lose some weight. I should quit drinking. I should quit smoking. I should eat more roughage. I should call my mother more. I should go back to school. I should try and watch some PBS sometimes. And if I say, well, does that cover it? And you go, well, no. And I say, well, I'm not in a hurry. What would it take? What would be the full range of change? And of course, the point is, well, I'm not sure. But surely that would be some of it. Well, how about tell me all of it? Maybe I could help. Tell me everything. You don't know, because you cannot transfer what seems to be. You cannot translate what would seem to be the feelings behind that into a description of it. Let us say that you went on for another hour. Everything from, well, I shouldn't cut my toenails in bed. And you just got down to just little minor things. And if I finally said, well, do you have any more? And you thought, well, I've picked on myself about all I can. That's about every bad thing I've ever thought about me. And I said, all right, if I could make these changes right now in you, would that stop all of your negative feelings towards you, all of your feelings that you should change? And if you had that kind of insight into you, if you could respond the way I'm asking, your answer would be, no, it wouldn't. And if I said, well, what are you holding back? You'd say, I don't know. Because you cannot translate any of it. But back to my rhetorical question, I was going to ostensibly change the paragraph. If this possibility had real validity, and you began to see it as such, what more could you ever say about your attitude, your complaints with, any questions you had about you? What else is there to say if energy is itself? If energy is itself separate, if energy is itself separate and alive, and that you might be the medium of it, not the originator of it, not a true translator of it, you are a partial way station. You are a partial translator, you and everyone else, a partial transfer unit. But all you can do is give a partial translation. If somebody comes up and says, I hate your guts, I hate you worse than anybody, I have tried to imagine somebody I could hate more than you. I've drawn pictures. I've cut out pictures of Hitler and Mussolini and pasted them together, along with Wink Martindale. And I've looked, and I've tried to think, who could I hate more? And it's still you. And if you said, you mean you hate me worse than when they cut out the end of the super, yeah, I know about that. I hate you worse than that. You still could not get the full hatred. You surely understand that. You can turn on a hot plate in Con Ed, Western Pacific Electric, Southern Company, can shoot you down the big wire as much electricity as will come in your house. But you do know you turn your hot plate or the stove and it heats up. You do know that you're not getting all the heat, all the electricity that came through there. Everybody knows that. Some of it is always lost. When you transform energy from one form to another, when you transfer energy from energy to matter and vice versa, and sometimes that gets very, as you know, disruptive. It can be more than having your hot plate overheat. Something is always lost. There is no such thing as a full conservation of energy when it's transferred, when it is translated. That being the case, that you could not take absolute as best it would be possible, for instance, hatred from one person, and you absolutely accept it as such, it would have lost something. If it could be in some way, which I'm not saying it can't be, but if in some way it could be, mathematically, chemically, etc., judged and enumerated, if this person brought you 10 points worth of hatred, 10 milligrams, 10 meters, a ton of hatred, you could not get the full ton. I mean, if you tried, if he said, I'm going to try to send you all the hatred, maybe it'll kill me, and you said, I want it, I deserve it, and he's right in front of you, you still can't get it all. So, not having it all, you cannot respond to it in kind. If you say, all right, is that it? And he goes, yeah. And you say, I've been waiting for this, I just want an excuse because you know how bad you hate me? Yeah? Double it, you mother. That's how much I've always hated you. But you're even going to send back less than he sent to you, which was not the full hatred that he thought he felt, that he said he felt, that he did felt. I'd feel. It's not possible. The dance will not fit into the expected, predictable psychological mold. Well, yeah, this person's obviously dominant right here. But wait a minute, you look at it another way, and he's not all that dominant, he's almost submissive. Well, I wouldn't call it submissive. I don't know, it's strange. We don't have enough statistics. Well, let's pretend we change the paragraph slightly. And I would assume by now that you can perceive the fact that life would not be, at least at our level, just the ordinary observable level, would not be operating at its fullest if it didn't have man. It's a safe view, since I assume that everyone's hearing this is a man. with a small m. And man would not be fully participating in the life of life if man had not and did not have his secondary world. And man would not have his secondary world if he did not have words. There would be no territories here or even apparently out there. We would not have anything outside of caves and gathering nuts, for instance, at a very crude level. We would not have institutions, we would not have civilization, and we would not have new territories in here outside the kind of neural activities that would be capable of supporting no more than mute existence as a caveman, for instance. There would be no secondary world there, here, same thing, were it not for words. There would be no new territories unless there were words to describe them. Now, if you can try and look that straight right down the barrel, then you come to this, that no matter what kind of attempt was made to convey a, quote, universal truth, it cannot succeed. It must fail. And a kind of pictorial, if not symbolic, linchpin, if you can see it as an example, would be this, that let's assume that you, a person, did see some universal truth. And of course, history is replete, not excluding you, believing, well, yes, not only are there either a universal truth or truths, but at least even I know one or two. Let's assume that that is correct, that we have a person here that does know a or the universal truth. There is no possibility of that ever being conveyed. None whatsoever. And the example, what I was going to try and get you to consider, and this has nothing to do with universal truths, it has to do with energy, but we'll play like it still has to do with universal truths, that there is no way that you could be certain, using you still as a generic person having this alluded to knowledge of a universal truth, there is no way that you could be certain, there is no way you could even ascertain at all that the person to whom you're speaking was not hardwired up in the sector of life that could never hear this. Being not at all, or not completely, disappointed by the widespread silence, I will suggest to you that you can see more in what appears to be the movable state out there. But based upon that lack of response, I will go ahead and point out that the real significance would be if you could apply that internally. The idea of the universal truth, maybe that threw or distracted some of you. I did not mean it in any specific way, other than the fact that the intellect, under the guise, whether it be of religion or whether it be just strictly academic, scientific now, that, but especially within the affairs of man, the secondary world of man, that there are universal truths. If they're not religious, they've got to be the point that you reap what you sow, for instance. Because you can even turn that into a metaphor for some of the laws of motion from Newton. That there's got to be universal truths. But there is no possibility of conveying a universal truth if it existed. None whatsoever. It is mathematically, and not in the academic sense, but based upon the spatial restrictions of a 3D world. If there is a universal truth, if 2 and 2 is 4, if that was it, and of course it would have to be symbolic beyond that, but if 2 and 2 was 4, and that was a universal truth and you knew it, there is no way that you could tell somebody else. It cannot be conveyed. It would defy the absolute structure, the constructure of a three-dimensional world. You cannot tell a universal truth if you knew one, if life allowed someone to know one. The other effects this has on the processes of life, turning it into things specific, I don't see a need to go into, because it turns into every faction, religiously, politically, academically, socially, every other way. But internally is what I'm left with now to suggest to you even more strongly, is it brings up the matter that everyone, whether they use the terms or not, continually, that are interested in things of some importance, believing that they are truly interested in greater insight into life, etc., that they may seek out books, lectures, some group or religion or something. But it's going to come down to this, that in some way you're going to have to sift, you're going to have to consider the energy, the information available, these so-called universal truths that these people have, that are in books and here and there. But then it's up to you that you have to go through it in your own innate wisdom, and you have to divine the minerals from the Gange, and you have to take in that which is a universal truth. But if it is not possible, which I am suggesting to you very strongly, it is not possible whatsoever, any attempt to convey a universal truth has no chance of success. It is not possible. Would you, if you followed that for a hypothetical moment, would you consider that there was some exemption to that just because it was you doing it to you? Because you have never paid any attention at the old level as to what sector of your own brain that you attempt to convey important information along to. Well, you obviously you pass along to that part that would seem to be receptive. You don't try and tell yourself something that would sound like one of my wild coyotes. The man tries to tell himself something, his brain goes, "Hey, don't give me that crap." Nobody does that. Well, if they do, they're usually taken care of by the state. You only pass along information, new information, truth, insight. You pass along to those who go, "Ah, I'm glad to hear that." If it were originally a universal truth, what got conveyed was no closer to a conveyance than it was for the person to try and tell you with every iota of their emotions, with all of their little cells, they hate your guts. They even hate the little hair, the little blind, almost invisible ones on the back of your arm. They hate everything about you. And yet you can't get it all. If there was a universal truth, the idea that in some way you might, which you can't start with, but that somebody had it and they conveyed it to you, and you went, and you conveyed it to you, it is not possible. This almost brings up, saying it figuratively because it's obviously about to, isn't it? No, it's not. I'll go on. Okay, almost an aside ergo, or an ergo aside. If you saw any of the possibility of this being a part of the living operation of the human brain, the human nervous system, then you would also realize that contrary to what life seems to have spoken amidst itself institutionally, the idea, the question about trusting people. How can you trust somebody? How can you trust someone's opinion? How can you trust someone's emotions? How can you put your trust in another person, period? Whether it be intellectually, whether it be sexually, romantically, emotionally. Just, it's a serious question in the city, in the secondary world, about trusting people. Might I suggest, all right, that with a real revolutionist, with someone who was neurally subversive, with someone living or attempting to scratch out some kind of existence up on the hillside out of the city, it's no longer a question of trusting somebody. or not trusting. It's a question of depending on somebody. Screw trust. That's a waste of time. It does not fit into the equation, the laws of physics of this kind, if you begin to see it, that there is no full transformation of energies from one form to another, or for energies apparently to matter, or back and forth, or for processes into things specific, and from things specific back into processes. The translation is never complete. So the idea, God, I used to try and trust people, and then my mother let me down. Oh, but then I fell in love, and we were so happy. We were young and in love, and we've jumped through the roses, and we even tried to find where Peyton Place existed so we could move there. And then she ran off with a budding opera singer. It was a long time before I'd trust anyone. Even now, I'm suspicious. It seems to be of some importance. Or I was one time tried to pursue a religion. I was a member of the church, and then I found out that the minister, our priest, our rabbi, our great leader, was doing things I don't care to talk about with various members of the choir. Who can you trust? It's not a matter of trust. It's a matter of being able to depend. It's a matter of whether you do depend. And then, for a real revolutionist, the matter of it being dependability out there, forget it. Of what importance is that? It's on whom can you depend internally. And it would seem to be obvious, well, I depend on those that agree with me, because I don't try and tell myself something that I know myself's going to say, hey, don't give me that stuff. Right? I mean, if I'm going to bring some new information, if I've gone out and went to the trouble to find some sort of new truth, I'm not going to try and find some place in my brain, if this was possible, that I could try and tell my brain go, I don't believe that. That'd be foolish. You have got to deal with people that you can trust. But of course, at the ordinary level, there is the question of who can you trust? Internally, ordinary people would still say, well, you've got to trust yourself, you've got to trust your emotions, you've got to trust the information you have, you've got to trust the best instincts, you've got to trust the voices of conscience, the voices of reason. But then someone who does start straying from the city, from the old world, the old building sites, intellectually, it's got nothing to do with psychological, clinical observations or diagnoses. It is simply a matter that you find out, I can't trust this. There's nothing to talk about, and there's nothing to go around. And it doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter how your memory is, it doesn't matter anything. It's simply you cannot trust this, not for any specific reason, not for some reason that is singular to you. You can't trust this. And so then the question is, well, can I depend on it? Screw trust, can I depend on it? I don't even want to answer that for you. In the final moments, would you care to consider on your own how this might apply to all ideas, questions, complaints that life is wired in to each person to have toward themselves, and all the ideas that man has lost his way, that man should do better, that man should change. Of how this might be related in an operational manner, insofar as all of these ideas are always less than perfect translations of the initial energy that life is needing and using, and it comes through man as a kind of itch, as a kind of untranslatable in the full sense, urge to change, something's wrong and I can't reach it. And there's got to be a universal solvent for this. There is a universal truth. Somebody somewhere, there's something I can come up with that will do this. And of course, all of this is not bad enough to drive most people crazy. Most people go along and live out their life and die and don't give us a whole lot of crap. But if you consider that energy cannot be fully translated into words, into thoughts, that the energy that drives life, that drives man, cannot be translated, then you're left with seeing that all of the local views of it, all of the labor, all of the activity that a person does in the secondary world, without this being a pejorative or sarcastic observation, is in a full sense busy work and fool's errands. But once you see that, there's nothing wrong anymore, because it's only people that doesn't understand, well, I'm being given busy work while I wait here, that if indeed it's not individuals in the three-dimensional definition saying words, feeling emotions, that emotions may be feeling themselves, that words may be saying themselves, and you may be the medium, that you may, sad to say, you may end up being either Punch or Judy. But if that be true and you understand that at the secondary level, there's nothing to worry about. It's not that I'm being tricked. It's not that, well, listen, I've been misused. I don't know who to trust, because now I found out that everything I thought was important was just busy work. If you see that it's all busy work at that level, and of course then you've got to be doubly sort of nutso to think, well, all right, I say it's true and I don't like it though. I don't mind that everybody else is being made a fool of, but not me. In that case, you are truly hopeless.